Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Today I want to take a look at the life of Lettice Knollys, spelt like this but pronounced Lettice, an anglicised form of Letitia, and Knowles, like Beyonce, which is quite fitting because, as we are going to find out, people liking it and thus putting a ring on it would prove to be pretty defining for this early modern lady. But of course, her life was more than just a marriage. Let's take a look. Lettice Knollys was born on the 8th of November 1543 to Sir Francis Knollys and his wife Catherine. Catherine was the daughter of Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister. At her birth, she was given the name of her mother's husband, William Carey, so she was Catherine Carey, and it's very possible that he was her biological father. However, as the precise span of Mary's relationship with Henry VIII is unknown, it has been speculated that he may have been Catherine's real father. With this in mind, Lettice is the first cousin once removed of Elizabeth, but she may also have been her niece. During the reign of Mary I, Francis and Catherine went into self-imposed exile on the continent. Lettice may have been one of the children that went with them, but it's equally possible that she was left at Hatfield with Elizabeth. Elizabeth's accession to the throne in 1558 made England safer for the Knollys family and offered significant opportunities for them to reside in positions close to power. Her father was made Queen Elizabeth's Vice-Chamberlain. Her mother was made one of the 4 waged ladies of the Queen's bedchamber, and Lettice also entered the royal household as a gentlewoman of the Privy Chamber. Lettice was married to Walter Devereux, 2nd Viscount Hereford, probably in late 1560. It may be that the expectations of marriage, principally the bearing of children, were incompatible with her role in the Privy Chamber because her payments were ceased in the following year. She took up residence at her husband's family seat of Chartley in Staffordshire. She would, however, visit the royal court. She did so in September 1565 because a report reached Diego Guzman de Silva, the Spanish ambassador, that Elizabeth's favourite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, had been flirting with Lettice in an apparent attempt to make the Queen jealous. Despite their future entanglement, at the time of this alleged flirtation, Lettice was very pregnant. Her son, Robert Devereux, would be born on the 10th of November. Robert Dudley was named as his godfather. From May 1572, Lettice was known as the Countess of Essex, as her husband had been created Earl of Essex. In the middle of the next year, 1573, her husband, who had been staying at court, obtained the Queen's permission for a plantation in Ulster. He set off a few months later and was away for a couple of years, returning in November 1575. In December 1575, there were reports, or gossip, doing the rounds in London that the Earl of Essex had, upon his return, discovered his wife had borne 2 children while he was away, both allegedly fathered by Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. However, the evidence for these claims does not surpass the level of gossip. Walter Devereux would return to Ireland the following summer. He contracted dysentery while there and died in Dublin on the 22nd of September 1576. There were more rumours that he had actually been poisoned, perhaps on the orders of Dudley, who was worried, apparently, about the potential revenge that a cuckolded husband might seek to enact against him. Simon Adams suggests that as, quote, Essex's references to his wife in his will are perfunctory. They may well have been estranged in the years immediately prior to his death. However, he also points out that where she was living and her possible contacts with Leicester are not easy to establish. I'm not sure if an estranged wife would attend her husband's funeral, but Lettice did just that on the 26th of November. Although perhaps her actions in this regard are about appearances rather than affection. In short, an extramarital affair may well have occurred between Robert and Lettice, but we have yet to uncover incontrovertible proof of it. From early in 1577, Lettice was seeking to assert her dower rights as a widow. Her jointure was, she complained in her letters to William Cecil, too meagre, and did not sufficiently provide for her state. She would soon get her way. Around the end of 1577 or the start of 1578, she would be informed that her jointure had been increased. Almost exactly 2 years after Walter Devereux's death, on the 21st of September 1578, Lettice remarried. Her husband was her son's godfather, Robert Dudley. It was long thought that this marriage was precipitated by a pregnancy, which is possible, of course, but if there was a pregnancy at this time, there is no record of a birth occurring at a relevant time. This has led some to believe that Lettice either deceived Robert Dudley into a marriage through a feigned pregnancy, or that there was a real pregnancy that ended tragically in a miscarriage. However, it may simply be that the couple were very keen to marry, so much so that they could scarcely wait for the customary 2 years of mourning to pass following the death of her first husband. Robert Dudley was apparently concerned about how Elizabeth would react to news of his nuptials, and not without cause. So he hoped to keep it secret from her for as long as possible. The couple's first child, Robert Dudley, Baron Denbigh, was born on the 6th of June 1581. To avoid confusion between Dudleys, we'll use Leicester for the dad and Denbigh for the son. As Lettice and Leicester's marriage had been somewhat private, although not secret, it was deemed necessary to depose a selection of witnesses before a notary, just before the birth, on the 13th of March 1581, in order to establish the existence of the marriage and thus the legitimacy of the child. From these witness depositions, we learn that Leicester had discussed his plans to marry the widowed Lettice at least a year before it actually took place, that the marriage was officiated by Humphrey Tyndall, Leicester's chaplain, and that it was witnessed by Lettice's father and brother, Francis and Richard Knollys, Leicester's brother, Ambrose Dudley, Earl of Warwick, and fellow nobles, Henry Herbert, 2nd Earl of Pembroke, and Roger North, 2nd Baron North. Unsurprisingly, considering the number of witnesses, the marriage did not remain secret for long. The French ambassador heard about it at the start of November 1578. It is not clear when Elizabeth learnt of the marriage or how she did so, but although she would allow Leicester to return to her presence as if she had forgiven him, she would never fully accept the marriage and would not extend the same grace to her kinswoman Lettice, who was not to be welcomed into her sight. Additionally, over the next decade, the Queen would react poorly towards any hint at the couple's closeness, and it does seem that, despite the pressure of royal displeasure, they were happily married. Leicester was a solicitous brother-in-law and a loving stepfather. After all, this blended family had been in each other's orbit for many years. In historical fiction, Lettice is often presented as a grasping schemer, frequently rubbing her marriage in a heartbroken Elizabeth's face. But I think that is because Elizabeth and Leicester are the love story. So it's all too easy to figure Lettice as the other woman, an interloper. In terms of Lettice's true character, I think the evidence runs somewhat counter to this common fictional narrative, because despite being entitled to be known as the Countess of Leicester, that was not how Lettice styled herself in the aftermath of her marriage, keeping the Essex styling instead. She waited a number of years to take up permanent residence at Leicester House, as was her marital right, and when she did so, seemingly in around 1583, Elizabeth once more voiced her anger towards Leicester about his marriage, for he opened the same more plainly than ever before. Lettice, it seems, would be accused of much. Indeed, I wonder if she could do anything right in the eyes of the Queen and many commentators. In June 1583, Elizabeth was reported to have erupted at news of a plan to marry Lettice's daughter Dorothy to James VI of Scots. The Queen was apparently horrified at the thought of him being married to the daughter of such a she-wolf. In 1584, she and Leicester were said to be planning to marry their son Denbigh to Arbella Stuart, on whom I have already made a video that I will leave linked in the card. But suffice to say that Arbella had the level of royal blood flowing through her veins that would make any such marriage being planned without the Queen's consent dangerously close to treason. As it was, little Lord Denbigh, his father's only legitimate son, was just 3 years old when he died on the 19th of July 1584. Leicester was, no doubt, bereft, but when making the decision to absent himself from court and the company of the Queen, he said he was going, quote, to comfort my sorrowful wife for the loss of my little son, whom God has lately taken from us. I think it is a mark of his care for her and the comfort he derived from her that it was to his wife he went in this moment of profound loss. Of course, he may have hoped to make another legitimate son with her. In 1584, Lettice was 41, so pregnancy would not have been impossible, but as it was, she would have no more children. The year following their son's death, in the summer of 1585, they retreated together to Kenilworth, which apparently enraged Elizabeth. Her ire was further fuelled by gossip that reached her of Lettice's apparent plans to join her husband as he was leading the English intervention to support the Netherlands. Allegedly, it was her intention to go there, quote, with such a train of ladies and gentlewomen, and such rich coaches, litters, and side saddles as Her Majesty had none, and that there should be such a court of ladies as should far pass Her Majesty's court here. When Lettice heard of these tales and the Queen's reaction to them, she was said to be greatly troubled. There was, it seems, no such plan. Lettice had work to do in England, as she was the wife of a man with estates to oversee and lands to manage. With her husband abroad, she was left in charge. Leicester drew up documents to ensure that that was the case. Leicester was back in England at the end of 1586, but was sent back to the Netherlands the next June. Her son, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, reported on his mother's grief at her husband's departure, describing her as being in mourning for him. She got him back later that year, but their reunion would not last long this time either. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, died at Oxfordshire on the 4th of September 1588. For more evidence of the affection and trust that existed between them, we can look to his will. He named her as the executrix, and asserted within it that she should be well provided for. Despite, I believe, his best intentions, he did not leave her with an uncomplicated inheritance. In October 1588, the month after Leicester's death, there was already a legal challenge to her having inherited Drayton Bassett as part of her jointure. Leicester having a surviving but illegitimate son also complicated things. However, it was his debts that threw a real spanner in the works for his widow. Her jointure took a real beating to settle them, and she would end up selling Leicester House to her son, who would rename it Essex House. There was no 2-year mourning period before her next marriage, because Lettice married Sir Christopher Blount in July 1589, apparently seeking the protection offered by her husband against the dangers that may ensnare her in her widowhood. Once again, there were rumours that another husband had been poisoned. This time, she was the focus of the blame. So the story went, Lettice and Blount had begun an affair while Leicester was still alive, and to avoid him murdering them, she killed him. Logical. If Leicester had been the cause of the rift between Lettice and Elizabeth, his death did not mend bridges. Elizabeth's ire was seemingly fixed, despite the fact that many members of Lettice's family were at the heart of the Elizabethan court, and that Lettice's son, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, had seemingly replaced his godfather and stepfather as the Queen's favourite. It seems that Lettice was distressed at the estrangement and keen to regain her Queen's favour. She had retired to that contested property in Drayton Bassett and would, from there, write to her son. In the second half of the 1590s, her letters to him make clear her angst. At one point, she writes that she will not return to court until Elizabeth will reconcile with her. In another, she reports that she has information from friends that the Queen might be at last ready to make peace. She wonders, in her letter to her son, whether a trip to London might be worth her while. She was in her son's Essex house in London between January and March 1598. Elizabeth studiously avoided Lettice, only deigning to meet with her before the latter returned to Drayton Bassett. Apparently, hands were kissed, but nothing really changed. The following year, 1599, saw her son in hot water. Robert Devereux had cajoled his way into the role of Lord Lieutenant of Ireland during an established period of war. He failed to defeat his Queen's Irish enemies. He would instead make peace without her consent, and as if to enrage her further, he then went about knighting people. He was back in England in September 1599 and decided to burst in on Elizabeth in her chamber before she was dressed, a total breach of protocol and her privacy. For this and his spectacularly mismanaged military campaign, he was placed under house arrest in disgrace. Lettice returned to London to plead for her son. She even tried to sweeten the deal with the gift of a gown that had cost her £100. Elizabeth would receive neither gift nor gift giver. However, it is said that the appeal was scuppered not simply because of the animosity between Lettice and Elizabeth, but because Lettice's daughter and Robert Devereux's sister Penelope, Baroness Rich, is said to have written such an arrogant letter that it ultimately ruined the appeal to the Queen. Lettice's son would get his freedom, at least for a short while in 1600, but Elizabeth did not return his monopoly on sweet wines to him, thus depriving him of his full capacity to live in the estate that so befitted an earl such as himself. In February 1601, Robert seemingly saw the line and then decided to blow through it and to take his stepfather, Sir Christopher Blount, with him. The Essex revolt was an unmitigated failure from which there could be no coming back. An armed band had marched through London with the aim of forcing their way into an audience with the Queen, allegedly to separate her from her wicked counsellors, i.e. Robert Cecil. But one might assume that they weren't intending to ask politely and await the Queen's pleasure. Despite his failures in Ireland, Devereux was young, dashing and male. It's possible to see how his thrusting ambition might have been read as an outright threat by an ageing, regnant queen. As it was, the revolt never gained the numbers it was presumably expecting as it moved through the capital. Robert Devereux was executed on the 25th of February 1601. Sir Christopher Blount on the 18th of March 1601. Lettice was now the mother and wife or widow of attainted and executed traitors. Elizabeth's own death in 1603, however, meant a new monarch, and thus the potential to make new bonds. Lettice's daughter Penelope, she of the earlier apparently arrogant letter to Elizabeth, managed to ingratiate herself with the new queen consort, Anne of Denmark, and Lettice was able to benefit from this. For example, Robert Dudley had fathered a child by Douglas Sheffield, also named Robert Dudley. He is that illegitimate son that I mentioned briefly earlier. But he had started to claim that he was not illegitimate, as had been thought, but that his parents had been secretly married. This would have made Lettice's marriage bigamous, leaving her with no right to her jointure. Her return to royal favour was no doubt helpful in getting the legal system to find in her favour. Lettice, who had buried husbands and children, lost to natural causes and the executioner's axe, would, however, know yet more loss. She is known to have been close to her daughters, Penelope and Dorothy, and she would come to know the unfathomable pain of outliving them as well. Penelope died in 1607, Dorothy in 1619. Lettice would live to the age of 91, and it seems she enjoyed good health until almost the end of her life. She was reported to have been able to walk a mile a day in 1632, which was 2 years before her death. She died on Christmas Day, 1634. She was laid to rest beside her second husband, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. It is so odd to me that in the story of Lettice and Robert, she is the craven interloper, the ambitious temptress who wooed him away from his true love, the Queen, who in so doing broke the sweet Elizabeth's heart. Why? Would Elizabeth have married him if he'd been free? Should he have stayed unmarried indefinitely after his first wife's death? Why are Elizabeth and Dudley presented as the love story? Has Lettice drawn the short straw when it comes to historical legacy? So what do you think? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. Or you can find me over on social media. I'll leave links to my Instagram and Twitter in the description box. Follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with some friends? Why not let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up? Please subscribe to the channel and maybe just check that you are subscribed. If you think you are, make sure you haven't been mysteriously unsubscribed by YouTube. While you're there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, why not hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.